Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today. I'm Jane Robertson, and I'm the Director of Communications for WellTech company Frog Systems. And I'm delighted to be joined by two fantastic people today. Paul Cann, who is the co-founder of the Campaign to End Loneliness, and Louise Goulden, who runs the Together project, to discuss coping with loneliness. If you have any questions during our discussion, please do pop them into the chat and we'll do our best to answer them towards the end of the conversation. I just want to start off with a couple of statistics, really. The Campaign to End Loneliness estimates that there are 9 million lonely people in the UK who lack friendship and support. Hopefully in our conversation today, we can explore some of the ways that we can all help our friends, family members and work colleagues to feel a little less lonely. We're going to start off by really having a look at how we define loneliness. And Paul, perhaps I could start with you and just throw a quote that I've seen at you, which said, "Solitude is pleasant, loneliness is not." That kind of resonates with me, but how would you describe loneliness?
Yeah, I think that can be helpful as a way of distinguishing, because loneliness is quite a distinct thing. We call it an emotion cluster, a group of emotions. And I describe it as a gap, a painful gap in your heart between the number and amount of contacts you have socially that you actually have and those that you want. And it's about quantity, but it's also about quality. So having friends, but it's also what is the quality of that friendship. And it's that gap between what you have and what you really, really want that causes this ache, which we think is actually an evolutionary thing. It's been with us since we began as human beings, because it's an ache that urges us to connect, to make contact with people, and to find company and connection.
And Louise, how would you describe it?
I'd absolutely echo what Paul said. It's that that lack of connection to people, and that can take kind of many different forms, and it's, you know, as individual as we all are. So somebody might have kind of fleeting or temporary phases of loneliness. Maybe they're somebody who lives on their own and has lots of friends and people to go out and have fun with, but they don't have that person on a Sunday evening to sit and relax with. And so they have those pockets of loneliness. And for others, it's more pervasive and ongoing. Maybe a change in life circumstance has led to them feeling just disconnected from the people around themselves and not really sure of how to get out of that cycle. So I think it's important to note that everybody's going to experience it in different ways, and there are going to be different ways for us all to tackle it.
And do you think, going back to you, Paul, as Louise pointed out there, it can be transitory, can't it, loneliness? You know, there are times of your life where maybe you don't feel lonely at all, but circumstances, situations change, and suddenly that becomes quite pervasive.
I think it's part of being human. I think it's a thing we all come across at whatever age or stage we're at. It's out there, it's possible. I mean, I get that sort of ache from time to time of feeling lonely and alone in the world. But actually, recently I've been very concerned about younger people, including my children who are now in their 30s. And for example, my son in lockdown, living in a flat in London with no garden, or my daughter trying to raise 3 small children who make their needs known in a house on her own all day long. And these are forms of loneliness which are as severe for younger people as they are for older people.
And as Paul's pointed out there, Louise, that the pandemic has just cast a whole new light on loneliness, hasn't it? The different circumstances that people have found themselves in. And I'm sure that resonates with you as well in your own family situations.
Yes, absolutely. I've got 2 young children myself. My second child was born 1 month to the day before lockdown. And I mean, my goodness me, I was just felt so relieved that it wasn't my first child, because, you know, I found becoming a parent for the first time a very isolating experience in many ways. I'd had this life full of work and social contacts and hobbies and doing the things that that enriched me, kind of torn up into 1,000 pieces, thrown in the air and fell back down. And I had to make sense of who I was now and what my role was in my family, in my friendship groups, in society. And I found that whilst I'd gained a lot from motherhood, I also found my world had become much more insular in some ways. And I think had that experience happened to me with my first child, had COVID happened then, I would have had it incredibly hard to not be able to just pop out for a coffee with somebody, or go to baby groups where I could chat to a few people and realize it wasn't just me feeling that way.
And now we're back in a situation where we don't quite know what's coming again with the new strain, and we've got people having to go back to work from home, which is another huge challenge, isn't it?
I think working from home, is a particular challenge, and we're all exhausted with this, aren't we? So I think, it's really important that employers and workplaces grapple with this. And I think many of them are doing that. There are some good examples of employers helping people to work from home effectively, but also to some extent sociably. For example, can I give you an example?
Absolutely.
The National Grid developed a scheme which it basically found by advertising people and their families who had been shielding or affected by shielding, and created a group of people who could share information. It was a Yammer group, I think. They could share information, they could encourage each other, they could support each other, because it's that mutual support, which carries you through. It's when you're lonely and feeling you're the only person in that situation, you've got nobody to talk to, that it really becomes very, very difficult. So employers creating social networks, what they're called huddles. I hesitate to mention the word parties, but they're bringing people together to give them support, because they can't get into the workplace where you get that as a matter of daily life.
I think as well.
And Louise, I was going to say, Louise, you moved, didn't you, from working in a big agency where the hustle and bustle of life was continuing, to then being a parent and finding your feet as a parent. And now you're sort of we'll come on to what you do with the charity in a minute, but that change in circumstance can be quite stark sometimes, can't it?
Absolutely. It really can. And I think a big part of loneliness can be attributed to how we feel about ourselves as well. And if we're not feeling confident in who we are and our kind of in our own skin sometimes, then that can lead to us feeling disconnected. Well, if I don't even know who I am, how do I go out into the world and make new friends and make connections? I think to pick up on something Paul said that I think is a really important point to raise here, is that whilst COVID has had terribly negative effects for so many of us, for some people, actually, I've heard that they feel more connected than ever. People, there are people who can't or don't want to leave the house because they have physical or mental health challenges that actually make socializing really hard for them. And so during COVID, everybody was doing Zoom quizzes. There were so many events happening digitally that people thought, wow, I've been able to have all these connections during this time. And then as people kind of start going back out into the kind of real world, people are actually really worried that they're going to be forgotten about. So disabled people living in care homes. So I think it's so important that, we're all hoping life gets back to normality at some point in the very near future, but that we don't forget that actually normality for, a big chunk of people in our societies isn't full of wonderful social connections and kind of happiness inducing events.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, because in fact, in some ways, we got much greater solidarity. We came together in that time, either, within our families and our narrow circles and the people we were able to connect with, or out around, for example, in my village, we did hundreds of things as a good neighbor scheme that connected people, sometimes younger people and older people, in a way which brought them together. My only worry about this is, if I can share a worry, is the effect of technology has been a bit different depending on where you're at in your life journey. I chair a charity which supports young singers, and these young singers were so keen that they took to Zoom and online singing, properly done, synchronized recording in their studio, etc., like ducks to water. They were tech savvy, they were self-confident, and they were able to have some lovely new experiences, which we never had before COVID. I worried about the older people who were not online and who got left out and didn't really have a chance to enjoy that opportunity. And I think that is a big gap for us to look at.
So let's just talk a little bit about why you both got involved in the sort of trying to combat loneliness through the charity work that you do then. Paul, the Campaign to End Loneliness, you co-founded that. How did that come about, and what prompted you to set that up?
A few of us who were directors of charities, national charities, we knew each other quite well, and we had a report from my previous charity, Help the Aged, which showed that loneliness was actually increasing rather alarmingly. And we realized that what we were doing individually in our organizations, which are wonderful, and we were doing great things, but it was nothing like enough to tackle the problem of loneliness. And so we ought to come together, make a big deal of this word loneliness, and work together in collaboration. And that collaboration was just 4 charities at the beginning, with a wonderful funder who realized the significance of this issue. And now it's hundreds and thousands of people, and indeed it's now across the world. There is work going on across the world on loneliness and social connection. So it was that kind of motor of saying, we're not doing enough, we're not getting it right, we need to collaborate. Let's work together to raise awareness, to influence the public agencies, to galvanize communities more. Because believe it or not, I think about 10, 11 years ago, loneliness was not being talked about in the same way as it is now.
And Louise, your charity, the Together Project, this came about through you, as you've mentioned, becoming a parent, and also that sort of longing, which I think, Paul, you've laid out too, to connect generations. You know, we're terribly guilty in this country, I think, sometimes of ignoring older people, and there's so much richness there. So tell us about the Together Project.
Sure. So as I mentioned, when I became a parent for the first time, it was a big period of adjustment. And kind of a few months down the line, as I was coming out of the kind of crazy newborn fog, I kind of felt I could get my head above water a bit. And I thought, oh, I want to feel more kind of connected to my local community. And I'd love to find ways to do that with my young son, because, you know, he brings me a lot of happiness, and I think he could bring other people happiness, and we could kind of together. And I'd really started to notice that actually my son was this wonderful conduit for striking up conversations with people who I otherwise wouldn't have spoken to. So maybe in the supermarket queue or on the bus, you know, had this smiling little baby and somebody, quite often an older person, I'd see them making faces. And so I'd use that as an opportunity to have a chat. And I got so much from it. And the older person got so much from it. And, you know, my son got so much from it as well. And we used to walk past a care home every day on the way to the park. And I'd think, gosh, there's a community of people in there who've lived these incredible lives, had all these experiences, and now are kind of shut away, it felt a bit, in a care home. I knew that it was a care home that didn't have much money. There wasn't much going on there. So I thought, well, I'd love to just go in there with my son once a week, sit in the residence lounge, have a cup of tea with whoever fancied it. And I knew I would get lot out of that personally, and I thought maybe other people would as well. And so that led me to thinking, well, actually, if that could have an impact on this kind of small scale, what about groups of parents and carers and children and older adults coming together regularly? And so the idea for the Together project was born out of my own experiences and this insight. And kind of at a societal level, we do lead these very segregated lives around age, particularly in this country, for so many reasons. And that's damaging at a personal level, to just kind of associate with people who are very like us, at a community level, and also at a societal level as well. So the Together project's aim is to have intergenerational activities that bring every age group and living circumstance together, for mutual benefit. You know, it's not about us doing something for other people. It's about people coming together to have these shared uplifting experiences that everybody benefits from.
And how do you achieve that then, Louise? Because obviously the pandemic has limited, you know, opportunities to visit people in their homes at times, and certainly care homes have obviously been horribly hit by those difficulties. So what sort of projects have you been able to kind of proceed with as you've got the charity off the ground?
So we ran some of our Songs and Smiles sessions via Zoom. So we would have care homes. Some of them would have big screens that residents would sit round, and then we had children and parents sitting at home on their little screens. And I had my new baby join us as well. But you know, to Paul's point before, some of the care homes don't even have internet, so that, you know, there was that divide already. And that worked well until things started opening up again a bit, and parents and children were able to go out to activities. And so suddenly the need was still there from the care homes point of view, but it was harder, understandably, to get the children and parents involved. So again, about, you know, different parts of society moving at different speeds. But we ran another project during lockdown as well called Hand in Hand Together, where children and care home residents created handprint themed pictures symbolic of reaching out across this terrible divide that had been created, and wrote little letters and swapped them in the post via us. And it was just this, it felt like this moment of kind of light in this really terribly dark time. The messages of support we got was just so incredible that we're actually developing it into an ongoing initiative that's going to be launching next year. So we're really, really excited about that. And we're doing some projects linking schools and care homes as well, virtually through storytelling. We're just really hoping that at some point they'll be able to actually go and meet in person too. So whilst it's been incredibly difficult for us, it's forced us to be very agile and adaptive and kind of future-proof a lot of our work.
And Paul, I mean, you've both said there that kind of intergenerational and using the music, using arts is such a powerful thing in these situations, isn't it?
Yeah, and I just wish we had the Together project everywhere, because what it has at its heart, seems to me, is this reaching out, you know, across boundaries, across age groups, you know, and just sharing what we have in common. It was Joe Cox MP, who was tragically murdered, who was such a campaigner for loneliness, partly because she experienced it herself when she was at university, who talked about how much we have in common rather than the things which divide us. And I'm afraid so often we think we are divided when we have more in common. And thank goodness the Joe Cox Foundation exists and is taking that forward. I mean, I'm fascinated by intergenerational projects, and I think they are very, very important, and there aren't enough of them. 5 years ago, I looked at the research which showed that younger people were likely to be severely lonely in the youngest age groups, as were older people in the older age groups. And I thought, well, how can we tell this story in an interesting and novel way? So I got a friend who is a great composer to write a piece of music involving a youth choir and a community choir of older people called The Voyage. And it's very moving, and people found that it brought people together across those age groups. I don't know if you've heard of a thing called Good Gym, which is another example, where volunteers, typically younger members of a running club, will go out of an evening on their training run. Maybe it's a Tuesday night, but on halfway through their run, they will do something in the community, like pay a visit to an older person who is housebound, or help redecorate a community centre. And it's this idea of older and younger, we're all in this together, let's help each other, which I think is very powerful.
Yeah, and there's so many parts of the community. Well, we're all affected by this, but if you're from an ethnic minority and living in a community where there aren't many of your colleagues and friends around, if you're struggling with, I don't know, bullying at school, I mean, it can be anything that kind of sets off a feeling of loneliness, can't it? How do we look at that? There are some risks, I think, and some risk factors to kind of look out for, aren't there? I mean, I know, we're not sort of clinical experts here, but are there things that we can do to look around us to see whether we maybe are, concerned about somebody? Are there things that might pop up that would make us think, actually, maybe I should sort of just open up a conversation with that person? What sort of things that we can do ourselves to try and bring some light onto this?
There's a thing there about working across the boundaries between community groups and local authorities, about understanding that community groups are respected, valued in the community, and to be supported. Sometimes, like our local NHS, for example, it depends on community groups stepping up. So there's a bit of a transfer of contacts there, a bit of transfer of information without breaching any confidentiality that needs to happen, to help us step up to deal with people who are perhaps at risk. The other thing I would just flag up is it's a cultural thing we need. We need to get better at reaching out. And it may be true of Brits, I don't know, that we're not so good at just reaching out, making conversation, chatting to a stranger and all that kind of thing. And sure, there are risks, but the chances are that we could connect better with one another if we did that more. And I believe that.
Yeah, and I think something that I was kind of dwelling on the other day, that one of the effects of the pandemic, we all know, the kind of tangible ways that we've been impacted, not being able to see friends and family, not being able to take part in a lot of the activities that make us feel fulfilled. But I was thinking that actually something that we don't really kind of talk about, but must be having a huge impact on us, is that if we're honest, we're all a little bit scared of each other right now. We walk down the street and any one person could unwittingly be giving us this awful illness. And even if we don't kind of consciously think about it all the time, it's there. And that's a really unhealthy way for us to be living. We evolved as hunter-gatherers, working in packs together to depend on each other for our survival. And now we're a bit fearful of each other. And I think we're really going to have to try and work hard to undo a lot of that kind of psychological damage that's probably been inflicted on us all.
I think that psychological thing is very important. Paul, I know that your campaign to end loneliness, there's a couple of reports that we'll share in our resources later, but it's very much sort of talking to you, say if you want to change your own behaviour and you're starting to feel lonely yourself, it's almost trying to encourage yourself to think, right, that's the way I understand I'm feeling lonely, but actually I can change that feeling if I position it in a slightly different way. So instead of saying, I'm just making those up here, I'm feeling lonely. Well, why am I feeling lonely? Well, the reason is because I've not seen anybody for a week. So actually what I'm feeling is I haven't seen anybody for a week. So maybe I should go and make an effort to see somebody. It's that actual sort of the positive sort of way of positioning a thought that doesn't say, right, I'm feeling lonely, so I'm actually just going to feel even more lonely because that's the way I'm feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we did a big report on this about psychology of loneliness, which is available through our website, the campaign. And we're very conscious that we can call on governments to do things, and they have done some things. We can call on communities to step up and be more involved. But actually then there's a question of, well, what do we do ourselves? So we highlighted in this report 3 very familiar approaches which individuals can use to kind of sort out our thoughts and our emotions a bit and redirect ourselves. So we talked about cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and also positive psychology. And it is that business, which you described very well, Jane, of taking stock and saying, I don't have to think of it like that. I mean, I found my tendency to think about the worst outcome of something, or the worst situation, has grown and grown and grown in the last 2 years. They call it catastrophizing, don't they? And it's that kind of confronting how I feel and then rationally trying to make your way through that I think these psychological approaches are all about, so that you can go forward more positively.
And Louise, is that a sort of approach that you try to take as well? Sort of unthink the way you think, in a way?
Yes, absolutely. And I think also I've been recently, I've kind of realized, like so many of us have, I've kind of become a bit more insular. And even as we've been through periods of being able to go out more and do these things, I've kind of naturally hunkered down a bit more, and it's just become less in my kind of brain to think, right, let's go out, let's go make plans and do all these kind of things. So I've kind of been harking back to what I touched on before as my original kind of impetus for setting up the Together project, where those incidental chats with people that I'd meet out and about, actually I found brought me a lot of kind of happiness and made me feel really connected. And I've been trying to do that recently, really put that into practice. So I was waiting for a friend the other day. We were meeting for lunch, and I was sitting there on my own, and there was a lady sitting at the table next to me. And I just said to her, I love your glasses. They're really nice. And she looked at me slightly surprised that this stranger just started talking to her. And then we just had this little chat just for a couple of minutes. And I came away feeling so invigorated by that, to actually speak to a stranger, and she got a lot out of it. I did. And we had this connection, and I thought that feels really good. And it's something I've just stopped doing, because, as I said, we're all a bit kind of fearful of each other, and everybody's masked, and, we're annoyed because somebody's coughed there and somebody's taken their mask off there. And actually, when we do take the time out to connect with people in those little ways, it has huge reciprocal benefits. So that's something that I'd really encourage people to start doing. It's a small thing that can actually have a real impact on everybody's mood.
You're completely right. And we, the campaign, we thought we had seriously arrived when we got a chatty cafe featured on the TV series Fleabag. We thought that was it, because it is that thing about, requires a certain amount of daring to do. And the psychologist, Gillian Sandstrom, has done some amazing work about how we get greater well-being if we do reach out, if we just engage in that simple conversation about your glasses or whatever it might be. And that is so important. It is quite cultural. We need to set examples of how that can be done, I think.
There's also, I'm conscious that we're talking about, the opportunity to go and converse with people. And there will be some people who, for whom that's not possible. They may be stuck in a block of flats and nervous about maybe going out too much, or just that's not their thing. So there's also that thing about just almost opening up a window, looking out at the sky, looking out at what you can see, not focusing on, your computer screen or the television screen or whatever, isn't there? It's trying to build something into your day that isn't the thing that's bringing you down all the time, that's making you feel on your own.
And I think that's particularly the case with people who have a disability. I'm really concerned about, for example, people who've had a stroke, and how the desperate aloneness and loneliness that they feel. and how we can help them find a way back. Or somebody who has sensory impairment is incredibly alienating because they can't connect. I know a lady in the village who can hardly see in front of her face and can't hear. And yet she's a deeply sociable, interesting, active, energetic lady. And we just have to make extra efforts. I mean, I do think that it's about as many approaches to doing this as there are human beings on the planet. You know, so many different things work. You know, I mentioned Good Gym. Louise has talked so powerfully about the Together project and what it's doing. I've come across some really outlandish lunch clubs in my time, no more so than the Posh Club in Hackney, which is kind of like riotous lunch club for older people, and appears to be without alcohol. And there is sort of many different versions of how we do things creatively to help people reach out. So I'm an optimist, providing we listen to what people are motivated by. What do you want to do? What matters to you?
Paul, if people are who are tuning in are in a community or indeed in a workplace or working from home or whatever, are there funds that they can access? Are there places that they can go to get information about how they can maybe build some kind of community activity that will help people?
Well, we will find on our website there will be plenty of pointers to ideas. But I think what we also find is that in local areas, there are funds available through local councils, for example, that want to do something to reach out, because they all recognize now that loneliness is a big deal. It's a terrible heartache for so many people. So there is funding. And then there are loneliness-specific grant streams, which you have to look out for. But if you come to the Campaign to End Loneliness website, then you'll find, there will be a way through that. Just get in touch and ask us, and we can help that. I think communities can do an awful lot themselves. Sometimes you need a bit of money to start off with. So have you heard of this project, Hen Power? Older people looking after hens, hen keeping in the Northeast. Amazing. And people, quite a few of whom had a dementia, who got so much stimulus, but also social contact from keeping hens and working together as a group in a keeping hens. So it could be anything like that. It could be a choir, it could be a book club. Communities can actually work together to do more themselves, but there is some money around.
And Louise, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Sometimes it takes somebody in a community or in an office environment to just volunteer up to try and get something off the ground, isn't it? And that can be a spark for something really, really helpful.
Absolutely. I think the difficult thing is often if we're in a state ourselves where we're feeling lonely, it can then seem a bit insurmountable to try and actually create something ourselves, and it takes a certain kind of mental state to be able to think, right, I'm going to actually try something new and be bold and connect with people. So I think it's really important that those people who can and feel that they've got the energy and the time to help others look for ways to do that. And I think one thing that at the Together project we're really, really passionate about is this idea of reciprocity. And actually, we're not, as I said before, I believe, about groups that go out and do something for older people. Let's go and help out those poor older people who might be feeling lonely. It's this realization that actually everybody benefits from making these connections, and everybody has something to offer and something to receive as well. So I think the best community initiatives or activities are really predicated on that idea of let's create something that people really want to be a part of. They're not just doing it because they're trying to be a good citizen. So, for example, we have our Songs and Smiles groups, which are music groups for preschoolers and toddlers and babies and older adults. And prior to COVID, we were in care homes, assisted living schemes, community spaces. And the idea was, let's create a really amazing music group that's full of instruments and laughter and activities that also just so happens to be relieving isolation and loneliness as well. And everybody has something to offer. It's a real kind of leveler everybody can get involved in, no matter their capacity, their abilities. And it's about fun. And I think that that's something that is just a really important part of what getting together should be. You know, we should be having fun together and actually making that, you know, if you're having fun, you're not feeling lonely is ultimately what it boils down to.
Yeah, fun and a little bit of kindness along the way. That goes a long way, doesn't it?
I think that once again, you're absolutely right. And I think there's a big value in laughter, you know, and on the list of our psychological interventions, we've got laughter therapy, and I think laughter should be right up there with everything we do, really. It's just, as you say, it's a bonding thing, and it's a joyous thing. It's a wonderful thing when we laugh together.
Just before I ask you a final question to wrap up things, Paul and Louise, I'm just wondering if anybody else has a question that they'd like you both to answer at the moment. I mean, I know this topic, we've sort of talked a lot about loneliness, and I would hate for people to come away from this conversation feeling lonelier. You know, we want to be very positive about this and show that actually there are things we can all do to help each other out, whether we're in COVID times or not. So. But if anybody does have a question that they'd like to ask, do pop it in now. I mean, I guess my question would be really, what are the practical, simple things that we could leave people with, both of you, that we can do, in the lead up to Christmas or at any time really, to help people that we may be a little bit worried about, and ourselves, to stop us feeling a little bit less isolated at the moment. Louise, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, it's understanding that loneliness is normal. It happens to everybody. There is no shame. There should be no stigma attached to it. And it doesn't have to define you. But know also that you don't have to live with it as well. There are, as Paul mentioned, and his fantastic campaign with so many resources. There are resources available. There are groups. There are initiatives out there. And if going out and singing just fills you with horror, there are myriad different opportunities there. There are things that can engage you. So do make that effort to look and find something that, start with your interests. What would I like to do? Not what do I feel I should do? Is there a hobby? Is there an activity? And there are probably people out there that you can do that with, either virtually or in person. So I think that's really important to just remember that, yes, it's normal. Yes, it happens to probably all of us at some point, but no, you don't have to live with it. And then from a kind of action that we can take to help others in our community, I would really go back to my point about take the opportunity, be a bit brave if you can. Tell that person that they've got lovely shoes or glasses, or have a chat with the person selling you your sandwich at the supermarket about the weather or something. And actually, it might just put that spring in your step that gives you a better day and does the same to them as well.
And Paul? I
think, you want to come back to this thing that throughout life, we go through changes, we go through transitions. Right the way through childhood, leaving school, getting a job, moving on from a job, and so on and so forth. And I just think we have to get better at being with people when they hit those transitions. And the one that worries me most is bereavement, because that is just hugely common in later life. And there is a wonderful bereavement care counselling from Cruise that exists. But there could be so much more, because this is a very, very common situation. I'm dealing a lot with people who have lost somebody and what they do. The practical end of that is, I think we should just help people to access things. Now, we have a shopping minibus, for example, actually because of some of the people there who have been bereaved and don't drive, their husband drove, whatever. So simple, practical things around transport, simple things about how do we help people access online things. So I think the whole business of accessing, helping people get somewhere or do something, is the thing that I would focus on.
Well, listen, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today, Paul and Louise. We've put the campaign websites, we'll drop those into the chat for you. And we're also going to add in the Co-op Foundation's campaign, which is for younger people, called Lonely Not Alone, which if you have a look at the site, it's a beautiful site. It's just based around the constellations of the stars and young people sort of explaining how they feel in certain situations as well. So it's really nice. An interesting one if you have a young person that maybe is feeling a little bit left on their own at the moment. We've also got lots of really useful resources from both these projects that we've put on our public wellbeing platform, which you can find at championcinema.com. And for anybody that's joining us from the platforms that we build for our clients, if you just search for loneliness, then all the resources will pop up, including that report that Paul mentioned a little earlier from the Campaign to End Loneliness, which is called The Psychology of Loneliness. And that has some really useful information and tips that you can use to sort of try and have a sort of reflect on how you think in situations where you are maybe feeling quite lonely. If you'd like to find a little bit more about what we do, Frog Systems, do please visit our website. You can follow us on social media. We share videos all the time of people telling their own stories about their own lived experience. And in fact, recently we indeed shared, as Paul was saying there, some videos from people who volunteer with crews about how they approach talking to people about bereavement. So there's some really, really interesting stuff that we do as well. And we'll put the recording of this conversation onto our YouTube channel very shortly, so you can share that with anybody that you think it might be helpful for. We do hope that we've helped you understand a little bit more about loneliness and given you some tips and information to support yourself or anyone else that you know who might be struggling towards the Christmas break. So thank you very much. Paul, thank you very much for your comments there. That's wonderful to know that you've enjoyed the session. And just leaves me to wish you all the very best for the festive season, and thank Paul once again and Louise once again for their company today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.